For my money, the presentation of the Lord in the temple is probably the most confusing story of the five joyful mysteries that you find in the context of the Rosary. And so, given all that, I thought we might take the time right now to kind of break down this particular mystery into its three component parts. First of all, the purification of Mary. Secondly, the redemption of the firstborn son. And then thirdly, the presentation of the Lord in the temple. And so first of all, with regards to the purification of Mary, as a matter of background, at that particular time, in that particular cultural setting, after the birth of a male child, the mother was considered to be ritually impure for a period of 7 days, as a result of which she was forbidden to worship or offer sacrifice. On the 8th day, the child was basically circumcised, thereby making him effectively a legal member of the Israelite people. The mother, though, would remain home for an additional period of 33 days to allow her blood to be purified, ritually speaking, which is why, incidentally, the presentation of the Lord always falls on February 2nd, because, of course, 40 days after Christmas is February 2nd, and 7 plus 33 equals 40. In any case, with regards to the actual purification ceremony, the family would then offer sacrifice on behalf of the mother. So it would either be a lamb and a pigeon, or if the family were poor, it would be 2 turtle doves or 2 small pigeons. But funny enough, not a partridge in a pear tree. Anyways, in the context of the gospel, you notice that the Holy Family offers the latter sacrifice in solidarity with people who are poor and impoverished in this world. Now, of course, as you probably know, Mary herself was immaculately conceived. She was conceived without original sin. So technically speaking, she didn't need to go through the purification ceremony. But she does so not unlike her son undergoing baptism, to basically fulfill all righteousness, if you will. And more to the point, to kind of show that they are faithful Jews and that salvation comes through Jewish history and Jewish tradition. Anyways, that brings us to the second part of the story. Again, the redemption of the firstborn son. So as a matter of background, again, in that particular time, in that particular cultural context, a firstborn anything, whether a human or an animal, was essentially thought to belong to the Lord, such that you could either give it to the Lord by way of sacrifice, or redeem it in the sense of buying it back. Now, obviously, human sacrifice was basically illegal, and so instead of offering their firstborn sons as a sacrifice to the Lord, the Jewish people would offer the ceremonial offering of 5 shekels, with the exception being the people from the tribe of Levi, because apparently these people were the only ones who remained faithful to God during that whole episode with the golden calf, as documented in the book of Exodus chapter 32. But that brings us, of course, to the third and final part of the story, the presentation of the Lord in the temple. Now, the thing I want you to notice here is that throughout the course of the story, there's no mention of any shekels, 5 or otherwise, which speaks to the fact that the Lord isn't being bought back here, but instead he's actually being offered as a sacrifice. He's being formally presented to the people of God as the Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world. And so that's basically what's going on here. Now at this point, a new character arrives in the scene, this old man named Simeon, who is told by the Lord that he will not die until he has laid eyes upon the Messiah. And so when he shows up on the scene, he basically issues 2 prophecies, one having to do with Jesus, and the other having to do with Mary. And so with regards to Jesus, what he says is that he'll be the light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of his people Israel. Now obviously the term Gentiles refers to non-Jews, which speaks to the fact that this idea that Jesus will be the light of revelation to the Gentiles is an allusion to Isaiah 45, where the prophet speaks about how the suffering Messiah will be the light to the nations, in a sense of bringing salvation to the entire world. Now, the corresponding idea of Jesus being the glory of his people Israel is a little more tricky. So as a matter of background, in the context of the Bible, the word glory often refers to the visible manifestation of God's presence in this world, whether we're talking about in the context of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, or the tabernacle at Mount Sinai. But you see, when the Babylonians destroyed the Jewish temple in the 6th century BC, the glory of the Lord departed. The Ark of the Covenant was taken to the mountains, such that even though the temple would eventually be rebuilt, there was still no glory cloud, there was still no ark, which gave rise to this prophecy that one day the glory of God would eventually return. And so given all that, when you look at the gospel, who is Mary? Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant who is called to house, if you will, the presence of God. And who is Jesus? He is the glory of his people Israel. He is the presence of God returned to his people. But that brings us, of course, to Simeon's second prophecy, this time involving the Blessed Virgin Mary herself. And this prophecy actually has 2 parts. And so in the first part of the prophecy, Simeon says that the child Jesus will be the occasion of the rising and falling of many people in Israel, which refers to two passages, actually. First of all, Isaiah chapter 8, where the Lord speaks of himself as a rock who will be the cause of the stumbling and falling of many people in Israel, but also the Gospel of Matthew chapter 16, where the Lord first of all calls St. Peter a rock, but then later on calls him a stumbling block. And so the whole idea here is that the Lord is basically presenting us with a certain binary option, if you will, as if to say, look, either you walk the path of suffering love, in which case you become a rock of the church and the light to the nations, or you go your own way, in which case you become a stumbling block, you become a cause of scandal for people who would otherwise be drawn to the person of Christ. But that brings us to the second part of the prophecy with regards to Mary. And so Simeon says, a sword will pierce your own soul also. Now, obviously, this foreshadows that really terrible moment where Mary will be standing at the foot of the cross when her son basically suffers and dies for the salvation of the world. But the other thing I want you to notice is that this word, which is rendered here as soul, actually is a typical term in the Bible which refers to the core of the human person. And so the whole idea here, right, is that even though Mary magnifies the Lord as a habitual way of being, as we hear, for instance, in the context of the Magnificat, Mary's soul, or her core, if you will, magnifies the Lord the most when she comes to share in his cross, when she too comes to walk the path of suffering love. Now, of course, the story finally ends with the appearance of yet another character, this 84-year-old widow named Anna, whom the Gospel says never actually left the temple, but instead worshipped there day and night with prayer and fasting until she too had the privilege of laying eyes on the Messiah. And the whole idea here, right, is that even though it is painful sometimes to persevere in the darkness, we have to realize that truly God is Emmanuel. He is with us. He is with us in the darkness. And what's more, Mary is there too. She is standing there at the foot of her own crosses. And so in the meantime, we're called to never worry, to never fret, to never be afraid. But instead, in keeping with the example of the figure of Anna, we're called to persevere in a spirit of prayer, fasting, and joyful expectation until the eventual return of the one who is the light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of his people Israel. And may God bless you all.